and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 292, and today's date is February 17th, 2014, and the title of this episode is A Military Strike in Syria Will Spark World War III. And what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing the exact same thing that happened in August. There is absolutely no difference whatsoever. The only thing that they're doing is they're just using a different tactic to get what they want. And again, to get what they want is they want Assad out. They want him replaced by a puppet government, and they want to put in the puppet government so they can set up the private Western Central Bank and put all the natural resources back on the US dollar. And they understand without doing this, the dollar will not survive. It will collapse. So that's why you see the United States in Africa. This is why you see the EU nations in Africa, in the Middle East, in Thailand, in Ukraine, in Bosnia, and now in Venezuela. They are continually spreading this out more and more because they understand they need to prop up the dollar. If they do not do this, the dollar collapses. And this is what we're seeing right now. And if they go into Syria like they tried to do in August of 2013, Russia and China back Syria. Iran has a pact with Syria that if a war starts, they will come to Syria's aid. So we can see how this is forming right now, and we're going to go through what else is going on a little later in this report. But let's get into the economic collapse news. We're going to head out to Spain, and what we're seeing is that Spain's debt is actually skyrocketing right now. It is the highest in 100 years. It has reached 93.7% of the country's GDP in 2013, and it's continually going up in 2014. And again, we have to remember the unemployment rate in Spain is very high, and that goes along with France, Portugal, Cyprus, Greece. You name it, the Eurozone is in big trouble. And right now in Spain, it looks like Coca-Cola is going to start closing some bottling factories. They're going to be laying off more people. And guess what's going to happen? Well, the unemployment rate is going to go up, and it's going to be worse for the people in Spain, and they will not have revenue coming in to sustain this debt, and that will just increase. And we're seeing this basically everywhere. I mean, every country's getting worse and worse, even though the corporate media is telling us that things are getting better, and they're telling us that, the whole Eurozone and the United States is in this recovery. It really isn't. It is a complete illusion that they're trying to make everyone believe that everything is fine. This is why you see the stock market continually being propped up. And right now the market's closed, but we see gold moving up right now. And again, as it continually moves up, don't be surprised if the Fed central bankers all of a sudden smack down gold tomorrow or the next day out of the blue, and then gold is pushed down. Because again, gold is an indicator. If gold starts moving up $50, $60, $100 an ounce, people are going to start saying, hey, something's going on here, and they don't want anyone to know what's going on because, their whole plan is to keep the dollar propped up to the very last minute, and they're hoping to get a war started to cover up the entire economic collapse. Now, what we're seeing in Italy right now, and we can see that everything is starting to really accelerate right now because they understand that it's getting harder and harder to maintain the status quo over here. And Italy is imposing a 20% tax withholding on all inbound money transfers. Italy has just ordered banks to withhold 20% tax on all inbound wire transfers, a decree which onto of everything will apply retroactively to February 1st. And all these deductions will be automatic. So they'll already be skimmed off the top, and they will withhold 20%. And again, these countries need a way to create revenue, and every single place they want to track down where all the money is. So this way they can say, you know what? We can go after them. And every country is doing the same thing. They're imposing more taxes. They're getting ready for bail-ins, and they're trying to track down cash. And the United States is also doing this with other different laws like FACTA, where they're going across the ocean to other countries They're looking into bank accounts. They have nations already cooperating, turning people in. Those people who have a U.S. Passport but working in another country, they now have to pay taxes to the United States. So what they're doing is they're saying, you know what, then I'm not going to be a U.S. citizen, and I'm going to renounce my citizenship. But now there is a bill pending where if you renounce your citizenship, they want to take 30% of your wealth. So we can see what is going on here, and it's just getting worse and worse. And the people in the United States, it's very tough for everyone because unemployment is very high, underemployment is very high, and people need the food stamps to help them survive. They are working part-time jobs, and many people are not opting into Obamacare, and this is a huge, huge problem, and this is why we see certain things starting to happen here. And if we look, even military families, 90% of their spouses are underemployed. Many of the low-ranking military people are making around $20,000 a year, and what they're seeing right now is a rise in food stamps, and things are just not getting better anywhere. And even, I know President Obama raised the minimum wage, but again, raising the minimum wage doesn't solve the problem. It's like treating an illness with medication but never getting to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is the central bankers. And we can, do whatever we have to do and raise minimum wage, raise this, but guess what? As food continually goes up and everything continually goes up, it cannot be sustained, and no matter what they do, it will not work. Yes, will you feel better in the short term? Yes, you will. Just like if you took an aspirin for a major illness, it relieves the pain a little bit for a little bit. But guess what? When that drug wears off, you feel the pain again, and once this minimum wage wears off, people are going to feel the pain again. Again, these are only for federal workers that he's raising the minimum wage, but again, he wants this to happen across the country. It will ease the pain a little bit for a little while, but again, the pain will return because we didn't get to the root of the problem. Now, here in America, we already understand that the banks have put a cap on wire transfers out of the country, and now Chase all of a sudden says they want customers now to produce their IDs when they're making a cash deposit. They want to know who's depositing money into that bank account, and if it's cash, you have to show your ID. So, for instance, let's say you're a parent and you have your son, your daughter in college, and you want to put money into their account and it's cash. You can't do it because it's not your account anymore and you need to show ID. They're trying to track down where all the cash is and who has the cash. And this is recent, and this goes on to say that Chase tellers are expected to begin asking customers for IDs when making cash deposits on February 1st, but the policy is not expected to be strictly enforced until March 3rd. This will be, they said this will inconvenience some customers, and for example, I just explained it that parents who have students someplace else will not be able to deposit money into their accounts. And what they're saying is, and this is coming from Anne-Marie McAvoy, former federal prosecutor, I guarantee other banks will follow suit very shortly if they are smart. Now, again, their whole propaganda is they're trying to stop money laundering. This is in no way trying to stop money laundering because this is not what they do for money laundering. This is trying to keep track of who has what cash and where did this cash come from. Your information with your ID is then sent to the IRS saying all of a sudden there was $500 being deposited into this account and we want to know where you got it. Here's $3,000 being deposited into this account. We want to know where you got it. And the IRS will be getting this information to track down where all this cash is going. Now, Why is all of this starting to happen now? Again, this has been ramping up. They've been slowly, incrementally doing this over time with the money transfers, now with the cash IDs. We see out in the Eurozone, they're raising taxes on individuals, going into Social Security reserves, raiding that. And we see all this happening because we understand that the collapse is getting very close. They know that they cannot keep this system going the way it's going. And we just have to look at the elite and see what they're doing. Right now, Soros doubles a bearish bet on the S&P 500 to the tune of 1.3 billion. He's saying that this S&P 500 is going to drop dramatically, and he's betting $1.3 billion that it's going to go straight down. So you know that something is up. A couple reports ago, I reported on that the big money players were already removing their money from the stock market and selling their stuff to retail investors because those people believe that this market's going to continually rise. It's almost like the housing market back in 2008 and the stock market where people thought, let's get into the housing market. Look, the prices are continually going up. And as soon as those people went in for flipping and speculation and all this, the market came tumbling down because all the big players were out already. The same thing's happening in the stock market. The same thing happened in 2008. The same thing happened in 1929. It's happening right now in front of our faces. Now, we understand since this collapse is coming, the government needs to lock down pretty much everything, and they've been doing this by trying to remove the rights from the people. And of course the rights cannot be removed from the people because we are born with them, but they're trying to make people believe that rights can be removed. And right now the Obama administration is attacking the First Amendment in unprecedented ways in this country. The assault began in 2012 with H.R. 347 and have accelerated to effectively outlawing legitimate political activity by grassroots organizations and minor political parties. The Obama administration attempts to silence political dissent. Political dissent is protected under the First Amendment and is political activity. The current administration is attempting to silence millions of libertarians, constitutionalists, Tea Partiers by attempting to pass new regulations which will destroy free speech rights. These regulations will make it illegal to do this: mention a candidate up for re-election within 60 days of an election. That includes every single member of the House of Representatives. Effectively, you will not be able to petition your own elected representatives. The aforementioned groups will not be allowed to register voters. Call for election or defeat of a political candidate. This will effectively eliminate all recall provisions in state constitutions. Hold candidate forums so voters can decide who would best represent them. In other words, primary election activities for third-party candidates would be prohibited. This provision would cut the proverbial legs out from under any political party or movement. The IRS is trying to silence millions of American voters. They're trying to pass new regulations that will destroy our free speech rights, and this constitutes a complete end run around Congress and ultimately the Constitution. So you can see what is happening. They're trying to disarm the American people. They're trying to get rid of free speech. They're trying to get rid of every single right. And they are doing this because they understand when this collapse comes and the war breaks out, and everything is all said and done, because they do believe that once this whole thing is done, they're going to reset the entire system, just like they did after World War II with Bretton Woods, and this time they want to do it without the Constitution. And this is what they're striving for, because they understand that this system is completely done. They understand that if they do not push their agenda forward in the Middle East and Africa, all these places, they will not be able to keep the dollar from collapsing. And again, China right now is setting up the yuan as the reserve currency of the world. And they understand this. This is why you see all the propaganda against China. This is why you see the pivot to Asia. This is why they're setting this all up, saying that there's cyber attacks coming from China. But I don't believe the war will start in China. I believe it's going to start another place, which will then spread into Russia, into China, into many other nations. Now, we understand the United States, the central bankers, through the NSA, have been spying on every single country. They've been spying on Americans. They've been spying on the government officials. They've been spying on government officials overseas. And right now, Merkel and the president of France, they're discussing a EU communications network. They're putting together something that's going to be separate and apart from the main internet right now, because they want something where the NSA cannot get into. And the Europeans basically need the internet to guarantee the security of their information. So they are prepping. They don't want the NSA to know what they're planning, and you can see this is all in preparation for what is coming, and that is actually war, because when war breaks out, it's pretty much probably going to be every man for himself at this point, because the shift in power is going to be enormous when this happens. Okay, now, in my other reports, I talk a lot about DHS and how they're tracking everyone, basically the federal government. They're tracking everyone. They're using the Real ID now. This is your license, and they want all states now to upload all your information to one centralized federal database. And in my last report, we understand that DHS now has license plate readers so they can track everyone's vehicles and keep an eye on you. We understand they have drones and blimps up in the air with cameras, and also cameras on the ground that have facial recognition to keep track of you, and so they know exactly where you're going. What they're doing is they're creating social profiles of every single person. And in my past reports, I mentioned that they'll be doing DNA, collect DNA, and uploading that with your fingerprints and iris scan. And right now, the federal government, they want the ability to completely track you by your DNA. The federal government is planning an even more invasive spy program using physiological signatures to track down individuals. The goal of this research is to detect as well as analyze and categorize unique traits the government can exploit to identify, locate, and track specific individuals or groups of people. Now, I've said this in the past, and now it's coming out. They will be tracking every single person. They need to know where everyone is. You have to remember they do have lists of certain individuals that they will collect or execute when the time comes, because again, they fear everyone out there. They do not want to relinquish their power. They need to get rid of those people who are a threat. They need to disarm at least 80% of Americans, and hopefully they're thinking they will take care of the rest of the 20%. This is why they've been pushing the gun control propaganda. This is why you're seeing all of a sudden tons of mass shootings. They are going to push this agenda forward because they understand time is of the essence. They understand that they need to get this done because they understand the collapse is coming. And you will see another false flag event that has to do with some type of mass shooting. You will know it's the one when the president comes on the news and starts talking about gun control, and all of a sudden he comes out with that we have the UN Arms Treaty and the gun bill pending in the Senate. We can pass this now, and he urges Congress to pass these laws so we can put a stop to these mass shootings. And you will know at this point if they are passed, or I should say when they are passed, because Congress will be put in a corner, and at this point in time they'll say we have no choice but to do this. You will know this is the end game, and you really need to start preparing for what is coming. Now, before that happens, we have to remember there are other things going on in the world. And we understand that the United States, the central bankers, are pushing their agenda forward. They're pushing it in the Middle East. They're pushing it in Africa. They're pushing it in the Ukraine. They're pushing it in Thailand. They're pushing it in Bosnia. Well, now they are in Venezuela. And right now, the Venezuelan government says they want 3 U.S. diplomats to leave the country. Why? Why do they want them to leave? Because they've been doing the same thing they did in the Ukraine, that they're doing in Syria, that they've done in the Middle East. They were pushing riots and protesters to overthrow the Venezuelan government. Why? Because they want to push the American dollar into Venezuela. They want a puppet government, they want to capture their gold, and they want their oil on the US dollar as the reserve currency. And we have to remember, Venezuela has some of the largest oil and natural gas reserves in the world and consistently ranks among the top 10 world crude oil producers. Compared to the preceding year, another 40% in crude oil reserves were proven in 2010, allowing Venezuela to surpass Saudi Arabia as the country with the largest reserves of this type. So this is what's happening right now. This is another country where they're trying to push the agenda and overthrow the government and put a puppet regime in there to put in the private Western Central Bank to capture their gold, because you have to remember Chavez wanted all their gold back, and now Venezuela has their gold. They, the central bankers, want that gold. They want their oil production. They want the entire country under a puppet government. And we see this happening all over the world because they understand if they don't do this, the dollar is doomed. Because you have to remember, one of these countries starts pushing the central bankers out of the country, they will no longer sell the oil using the US dollar. If they no longer use the US dollar, other countries do not have to hold the dollar. If other countries do not have to hold the dollar, those dollars come back to the United States, and they will these other countries will use other currencies to buy those natural resources, and this will then start spreading, and then you'll see more dollars coming back, and guess what? All the dollars coming back to the United States will bring in hyperinflation in the United States, and the dollar will start collapsing all over the place because no country will want to hold it. If they don't want to hold it, they will take their reserves, give it back to the United States. They will no longer want to hold treasury bonds. The credit rating of the United States will start to fall. No one will have faith in the US dollar or the treasury bonds, and that will start the domino effect of the dollar collapsing, and the central bankers will not let this happen. They rather start a war, which will then lead into World War III, which will then lead into nuclear war, and this is what they are setting this up to be. And again, they will push this agenda with every single country. For instance, they are now building up the case to get into North Korea. They're using the humanitarian propaganda, just like they're using it in Syria. They're bringing the case up into the UN. And right now, the Chinese are saying, whoa, 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 hold on here. Chinese officials say the Beijing government will oppose any attempt to refer the North Korean leadership to the International Criminal Court for alleged crimes against humanity. Russia already said, listen, we'll veto this if this moves forward. And China says sending the report to The Hague will not resolve human rights situation. Beijing has instead called for resolving the issue through constructive dialogue. North Korean government also called the report a political plot by the EU, Japan, and the US for a hostile takeover of the country. And we know this is absolutely true because they're doing the same thing in the Ukraine right now. We've seen many different reports come out saying the United States has been and the EU have been funding the protesters and the rioters to push out the government in the Ukraine and replace them. The same things happening in Syria. The United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, France, many other countries have been pushing the agenda, supplying the rebels, the paid mercenaries, with weapons for over 3 years now to try to push out Assad. And the whole thing is happening all over the world right now. Why? Because they understand we're at the end game right now. Now, just like we thought there was going to be peace in the Sudan, which I never thought there was going to be, all of a sudden, the warning of potential renewed heavy fighting came, even though the two sides are supposed to be holding to a ceasefire agreement signed in Ethiopia. South Sudan's army on Monday accused rebel forces of amassing troops and preparing to launch an assault against the strategic North Oil town. And you have to remember, the rebels are backed by China. Okay, and the South Sudan army and government is back, and it's a puppet government, is backed by the central bankers, U.S. government, and of course, the puppet government is saying that the rebels are going to start attacking, and they're going to start, using the propaganda to get the fighting back up and running because they don't want peace. Peace is out of the question. Every time you hear peace, calm, oh, let's have a diplomatic situation, let's have calm over here. Well, they say that when they're not trying to overthrow, the central bankers in the U.S. government are not trying to overthrow a government. If there are trying to overthrow a government, there is no calm, there's no peace, there's no diplomatic situation. There's just rioting, protesting, and fighting that you see. You see it in Ukraine. There's no diplomatic calm. They're not asking for diplomatic or calm. They're pushing the agenda forward. So you can see how this is all playing out. In the Middle East, yes, the rebels, the Al-Qaeda, calm down. Well, those are the rebels. Those are Al-Qaeda, which are the people of the country who are trying to push out the puppet government and the central bankers. So we can see what is happening right now, and it's happening all over the world right now. And again, we understand that in Iran, they're having these nuclear peace talks, which that is a complete illusion. The talks are really about the central banks and trying to get the central bankers into the Iranian banks and to put all their natural resources on the U.S. dollar. That's why the IMF is looking into their banks right now, trying to set interest rates. Iran is making deals with Russia. This is why the president is saying no one will do business with Iran right now, and if you do, you will be hit with heavy, heavy sanctions. Why? Why is he saying that? That is because they haven't set up the system yet where they'll use the U.S. dollar. They will use a different currency if they do business, and the central bankers cannot have that. Now, Iran is out there, and their leaders are out there saying that they doubt that these nuclear talks will actually succeed. The Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, says nuclear talks will lead absolutely nowhere. Iran's top decision maker, the Supreme Leader, said on Monday that while he is not against a resumption of nuclear negotiations with the world's major powers, the talks will lead pretty much nowhere. And he's saying that, again, they don't care about the nuclear weapons. They never did. They use the propaganda to scare everybody else. Over the last 30 years, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the central bankers, U.S. government have been saying that Iran has been building nuclear weapons for the last 30 years, and they've always been 3 to 5 months out creating this nuclear weapon that they're going to unleash on the entire world. Well, that's been going on for 30 years, and it's documented. You can go look it up. I've done it in one of my other episodes. Now, since we're getting closer to this point in time, they've been saying that Iran has the ability within a couple of weeks to create a dirty nuclear weapon. In 6 weeks, they can create a nuclear weapon, and they're continually going on with this. And the reason why they're doing that is because in secret, of course, the peace deal that they have is locked away in secrecy. Nobody can see it. It is unclassified, but you have to sign in, you have to have security clearance, and they're keeping track who is allowed to take a look at this document. So you can tell actually that there's something else going on right now. And the Iranian officials emphasize that it will never succumb to the bullying and blackmailing of America. He also said Iran's nuclear issue was an excuse for Washington to pursue hostile policies towards the Islamic Republic. To me, that's code for you're trying to get into our banks, and we know what you're trying to do is you're trying to take over our economic system, implement a private Western central bank controlled by the central bankers, and put our natural resources on the U.S. dollar, and to prop up your dollar. And again, this is all an illusion. I've said this since the beginning, and it completely is. And now, The commander of Iran's army ground forces on Sunday declared that the U.S. is heading for a collapse. It's very odd that people around the world see the United States the United States is on a verge of collapse. They're seeing it because they are seeing what's happening. Brigadier General was quoted by the Iranian Far News Agency warning Washington against any military action against Iran and predicting the U.S. was moving toward a final collapse. They're saying that it's a repeat of all the wrong methods against Iran. It will no doubt have no destiny but decomposition like the Soviet Union. Basically, what they're saying is if they keep following these policies, we will collapse just like the Soviet Union did. And we are headed in that direction. The U.S. empire is spread so thin right now. We are in very, very bad shape. We are printing, well, I should say, the Federal Reserve is printing money like there's no tomorrow, which there isn't because we're headed towards a collapse. The government is borrowing. They suspended the debt ceiling so they can ramp up this debt borrowing to unknown amounts, and this will be no good for the economy because there is no real revenue coming in from the tax base to pay for all of this. And as they escalate and increase this debt, the amount of revenue and the amount of debt and the amount interest paid on this debt gets further and further apart, and it just cannot be sustained. I mean, we're seeing this in other countries. That's why they're continually asking for another bailout and another bailout and another bailout. It cannot be sustained. And again, from all of this that Iran is saying, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said last month that if diplomacy with Iran fails, and again we have to remember Obama also said this, the military option of the United States is ready and prepared to do whatever we have to do. And that pretty much is a military strike. Now we understand that the central bankers, the U.S. government, they are very worried about Syria and Russia. They are sealing the deal right now, and Syria's new 25-year energy deal with Russia, a key ally of embattled President Assad, could open the way for Moscow's eventual move into the gas-rich eastern Mediterranean. The deal gives the Russians one of the world's leading energy producers, their first real foothold in the Levant Basin, considered to be rich in natural gas. Some analysts believe Russia could even be the catalyst for exporting and marketing the region's energy's riches. And guess what? The central bankers cannot let this go forward. They cannot allow this. And this is why we are seeing what we are seeing. The Geneva II talks going nowhere. They want Assad removed and a puppet regime put into place. Think about it. If they put a puppet regime into place, what happens? That deal with Russia disappears. And guess what? The puppet government, the central bankers, get all that natural gas and all the oil on the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. So what is the U.S. government central bankers doing? Well, they're looking to start a war. McCain is urging military intervention into Syria. Now, we've seen this before back in August. It's the same exact thing. The goal is the same. Yes, they're trying a couple different methods, but eventually they're going to have to use some type of false flag because we understand that all these other methods aren't going to work. John McCain has called on the Obama administration to deploy its already devised plan of military intervention against the Syrian government. The only way to achieve success at Geneva is to change the balance of power on the ground with military forces, said John McCain. So we can see what's happening. Now, we understand that behind closed doors, Congress allowed weapons to be transferred to Syria. And right now we also understand that President Obama has now given aid to Jordan. The United States is planning to use Jordan as their main base for sending state-of-the-art weaponry to foreign-backed militants fighting against the Syrian government. Again, we've seen this before. If you remember, if you go back to my August of 2013 reports when the whole Syrian fiasco was going on, what they did then back in July, they shipped military assets to Jordan saying that it was there for military training. And in July, when military training was over, they left all the military assets and they left the troops there. They also have the CENTCOM base, which is an underground base with officers that will enable them to control the battle in Syria. So the same thing is happening right now. They're using Jordan as a staging ground to move into Syria. So here we are again. American and European security and intelligence experts are in Jordan to develop two scenarios, the first of which would facilitate the deployment of U.S. and British forces in Syria. Their second potential plot is to oversee the arming of militant groups and help them develop plans to attack the Syrian government bases. U.S. President Barack Obama's recent announcement that he pledged $1 billion in loans guarantees for Jordan during a visit to Washington, during the King's visit to Washington. And again, this was on purpose. They're giving them money because they understand that the Jordan will be the staging area for the strike into Syria. Now, we understand that France, the president of France, was here with the president of the United States, and they were talking about things. And Russia right now is they're calling an urgent UN Security Council meeting to stop the slide towards escalation in Syria. They're saying they have a source which revealed that that Washington and Paris are currently putting a plan for military intervention in Syria to stop the advanced Syrian army. Now, we also, at the same time, having the Saudi regime they're attempting to persuade the Arab League to issue permission for military attack against the crisis-hit country of Syria. And they're seeking to persuade the League to approve a resolution which would call on the UN Security Council to use Chapter 7 of the UN Charter to launch a military attack on Syria to be led by the U.S. and France in partnership with certain regional states in Israel as well as Saudi Arabia's financial support. So plans are in the works right now. They're going to try, and they've tried many different things. They're trying the humanitarian way into Syria. Russia has putting the block on that. They've been trying the war crime scenario against Assad. That was with Geneva II. They tried the Geneva II to use that to replace Assad. All of this is failing. Again, to push this agenda forward, they will resort to a false flag event. This is why we've been seeing the propaganda of chemical weapons hidden in Syria, biological weapons hidden in Syria, an Al-Qaeda presence in Syria, a terrorism presence in Syria, and some of those terrorists are coming back to the United States, which cannot be tracked. They're lone wolves. Some of them are even bomb makers, and we're seeing the Syrian Electronic Army, cyber attack after cyber attack after cyber attack. They are building the foundation for the next false flag event, and they understand that World War III will come about, the strike into Syria, because Russia and China are backing Syria. Iran has a pact with Syria if a strike should happen. If Syria should strike Israel, for instance, Israel has a pact with the United States. So you can see how this can really springboard and push world war to every single nation. And we are seeing this all over the place. And now we understand that the United States and many European nations and Russia and North Korea and China have been preparing because they understand what is happening. Everyone is preparing for World War III. And this is why all the military assets have been moved into place. And right now, the United States are moving their drone bases into Central Asia because they are getting prepared for what is coming. And again, We are seeing all the propaganda build up. Again, we're seeing many, many cyber attacks hit the United States. This is to pass certain laws so the government can take over the internet and control what is going on, because they really don't want people to understand what is going on when this thing goes full force. And they want people to be in the dark because they want Americans willing and ready to fight in this war. And right now we're seeing Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding site. They were cyber attacked, and usernames, passwords were stolen. And we're seeing, they don't know who this is from yet, but there was an attack on the German government, and don't worry, they traced this to China. And I've repeated this many, many times. It is very difficult to trace an attack because these cyber attacks or hackers are bounced off the true ones are bounced off many servers, and it's very, very difficult to trace, because if this was actually true, you would never receive a spam email into your email box again. You know why? Because they'd be able to trace them, and they would put a stop to them. And this goes on to say that hackers attempted to take control of the senior German government officials' computers last year, and the source has been traced to China. Emails infected with the virus were sent to officials in several ministries and to banks in September, just before the G20 nations, including China, met for a summit in St. Petersburg, Russia. So you can see what is happening. They're building the propaganda against China, North Korea, Syria, and they are building all of this up for the next war. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.